Guys, welcome back. We had a fantastic weekend of UFC fighting. And what did I tell you about this fight night against Sandhagen versus Song Yadong? That was absolutely incredible. It sucks that my guy Song Yadong came up a little short. He had a gruesome cut over his left eye. So what I want to go over is a little bit about fighter safety and how that gruesome eye cut opened up and why his was stopped and Gregory Rodriguez got to continue. So as you can see that if we're going to pull up a picture, you see Gregory Rodriguez's cut was in the center, in between his eyebrow. So in a sense, it didn't have any effect on his vision. And it was an open gash, and I feel like you could see a little bit of skull in the center of it. But in a sense, the doctor kept a close eye on it, and it was only a 3 round fight. So they pushed it, and the ref kept a close eye on it, and the doctor approved it. And the cutman was able to control the bleeding as much as they could. But the difference with Song Yedong, since it was a 5 round fight, and Corey Sandhagen kept picking at it, and that cup kept ripping, and it got very close to the eye. And as that you could understand, the doctor did not want to risk the fighter's vision because that can potentially end their career. So the fact that that fight got stopped was completely necessary, and thankfully Song Yedong can get that stitched up, heal up, and continue and blossom and have a wonderful career because possibly any more potential, and that could be a life threatening or career ending, at least as I could say, injury over the eye. So thank God for the UFC and the athletic and all the healthcare professionals that oversee that and made sure that the fighters got the attention they needed and they were safely able to go home. On another note, Corey Sandhagen won, and you obviously know he has some options. He can fight Merab Dashishvili, the Machine, which I think is an absolutely fantastic fight because Merab just came off a win over Jose Aldo, or he can fight Chito Vera. Obviously, there's options. There's gonna have someone's gonna have to fight, the loser, I'm assuming, of Peter Yan, Sean O'Malley. So those guys are coming up soon. So there's a lot of exciting fights in the bantamweight division. I keep trying to say this. This is really one of the most exciting divisions right now in the UFC. These bantamweights are absolutely incredible, and I really hope that Marab gets the fight against Sandhagen. And I love that little statement they made. They were saying that Sandhagen is like the Tony Ferguson of the bantamweight. Like you cannot fight this guy without looking like you just went through like a meat grinder or like you just jumped like a barbed wire fence. Like he really like puts heavy damage, and no pun intended. He's a 5'11", 135 pounds. He might not possess that knockout power, but he's a sniper. And he always gets to his target, and his footwork is absolutely phenomenal. He was dancing around the octagon like a ballerina and just picking apart Song Yadong. Maybe he wasn't hitting him as hard. Song Yadong's right hand carries massive power, but his wrestling has improved, and he shows why he's one of the top contenders in the bantamweight division. So really excited to see who the matchmakers decide to put him against. Another really incredible topic that I want to bring up is Francis Ngannou has been talking about like they need like a mediator in the UFC to talk with the fighters because in a sense that Dana White is just becoming he's becoming more and more powerful. The promotion is growing astronomically. It's just like a meteorite just going not a meteorite, like a shooting star. They are blowing up, and there's just not a lot of say for the fighters. And why I understand Francis is that he's in the heavyweight division. For anyone who knows like anything about prize fighting, like most of the time the heavyweights is like the biggest draw. It's the most money to be made. I mean, like Ali, Frazier, Mike Tyson.
I'm the best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me.
I mean, anything you can think of when you think of heavyweight. I mean, like these guys get paid. They're the heavyweight division. They're usually one of the most exciting divisions, or at least one of the most. The heavyweight champ is considered to be the most dangerous man on the planet because he's the heaviest weight in that same sport, whether it's boxing, UFC. So he should be considered the most dangerous man on the planet if he's the champ of his division. So the fact that Francis can be getting paid way less than just like a fighter like even like Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is a much bigger name. Win or lose. Doesn't have to be a champion. He draws more, which kind of puts into the fact that like the UFC kind of structures their thing like through an algorithm and the way like the fighter promotes himself versus how many followers this kind of determines his pay and pay-per-view points and bonuses and I guess how many fights that he has taken in the UFC, which is a crazy structure. Another thing that's really tough, Francis talked about, he lost a lot of money on a cryptocurrency sponsorship which he wanted to sign, but as you guys know, the UFC doesn't allow any of his fighters to subcontract any promotions or any sponsorship or endorsements during UFC cameras. So obviously nothing at the event and anything that the UFC is recording for their promotion and obligation, you have to follow like these strict guidelines. Like working for a company, the NBA in a sense has like the uniforms. So you have the UFC doing the deal with Venom and they just extended their deal and now they did a thing with Dwayne the Rock Johnson and they had these ridiculous red shoes that from what I was told the UFC fighters got no incentive to wear them. They had to wear them for the ceremonial weigh-ins and they had to wear them going to the octagon. And Nate Diaz saying that he hated these shoes, that these shoes sucked.
Total professional with this one.
These shoes fucking suck. Look at these shoes. They make me put this shit on.
Sponsors, you don't hear that. Guys, back
Fuck
to you.
these shoes.
In a way, I understand that like it wasn't essentially about the shoes, is that the fighters kind of got cut out in the deal. And not to saying maybe The Rock's name is just on it and not don't know who's actually behind that actual brand, but you got fighters like Terrence McKinney just trying to reach out to tell The Rock like, "Hey, they gave us nothing and like, we want your support to be in our corner." But in a sense, the UFC does things like this to its fighters that sometimes they don't get the fair end of their deal. And I'm hoping that when Francis brings up and the fighters step up, there's like 700 fighters in the UFC roster, that they can come to like some maybe collective bargaining agreement where they can get better funding and better incentives to continue to work in the largest, fastest growing MMA promotion in the world. The UFC has nowhere reached its ceiling. Its ceiling is continuing to grow. It is getting so, so, so big. They have even, which is one of my favorite things on Tuesdays, is the Contender Series. In a sense, Dana White has created his own audition. But a lot of people who watch the fighting will tell you, like, they know about the Contender Series versus, like, some of the biggest professional fights in, like, Bellator or in one championships. I mean, like, he has a job interview promotion where he just chooses some of the best fighters that maybe haven't got their name or still building their name a chance at a door to get into the UFC. So, in a sense, he probably thinks you can come to the UFC if he already put you in the Contender Series, but he just wants to see out of the two who's better. So it kind of gives like the audience, it's like a minor league slash most dangerous job interview in the world. So you have to understand, like, in a sense, he's a genius. And now another thing, we had Joe Rogan come out talk about if Dana White would ever leave the UFC or leave it, just walk away from it, that he would walk also, which is crazy because it's like, I mean, I feel like they're their own separate entities, and Joe was bigger than like essentially his role, his podcast and his deal with Spotify is like the biggest thing. And I feel like he does the UFC out of like love. He loves commentating and sitting, ringside and having the crazy reactions with like Cormier and Bisping and all his colleagues. So I don't see it as being like a money thing for him. I feel like this is like his passion. He just really loves it, and to be a part of the sport, he's a true, one of the true original fans of MMA. So for Joe Rogan to say that, I mean, he must be a huge fan, of course, of Dana White, because Dana White essentially brought UFC to where it is today. Them and the Fraternal Brothers, and obviously building up names going through. Another thing we're going to mention is the Canelo Golovkin Triple G. And as you understand, we're talking about the UFC fighter pay that's not up to par. Well, these two names in boxing, Canelo, just let's talk about guaranteed, got 45 million guaranteed to fight Triple G. Triple G got $20 million. So that's like more than an entire UFC card that they won't even pay out all the fighters, including a championship, any of the guaranteed money that these two boxers got. So this is kind of like some of the concerns for these professional fighters, is that they believe that the UFC is just taking a much bigger piece of the pie than kind of dividing it carefully, versus like Canelo has his own promotion and Gennady Golovkin has his promotion, and I feel like they lay out their own capital to create the fights, and they work with the broadcasters and promise them that they'll give them X amount of fights to broadcast a year. So it's like boxing compared to UFC is an absolutely completely different financial pay strategy, because a lot of the fighters essentially work with the promotion company, but in a sense collectively bargain their own salaries based on what they believe they can bring to the entire pie. So it's absolutely incredible how that system works versus professional MMA, versus like a kind of like a union grid, and how they get paid versus the algorithm and how they bring in the business. So super interesting, but obviously UFC is just so exciting. The networking, the advertising that the company does is absolutely amazing, and it just makes people very drawn to the sport, and it's like become of like a collective prize for the MMA fighters, because they only want to fight in the UFC. It gives them the most like credibility. That's what the UFC I think holds the most in professional sports, is that in MMA, if you fight for the UFC, you are considered like in you're the best. That's how like the true martial artists look at it. If you're in the UFC, you're fighting the best of the best in the world, in the biggest promotion, under the biggest stage. Guys, another thing, we have a few more fights coming up, and I guys always want you to stay tuned to Notorious Radio 718. Remember, this is Fight Pass with Mitch. Always like, follow, subscribe us on all platforms, and stay posted, stay tuned. There'll be a lot more.